At 11:47 a.m. on September 15, 1940, flying at 22,000 feet over the Kent terrain, Pilot Officer Colin Gray had a Messerschmitt Bf 109 perfectly framed in his sights. He was closing rapidly, just 400 yards away. The German aviator remained oblivious to Gray's presence. Gray's thumb hovered over the firing button, mere moments from striking. As he reached the optimal range for a kill, the Messer suddenly plunged into a steep dive. Gray pursued, pushing his control stick forward, feeling the negative G-forces press him against his harness. His Rolls-Royce Merlin engine abruptly sputtered and died, the propeller spinning idly in the airstream, and his aim faltered. 1,030 horsepower vanished instantly. Gray swore, fully aware of the issue that plagued every RAF pilot: carburetor flooding. His engine, starved for perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, had transformed his Spitfire into an unpowered glider. The Messerschmitt then leveled out from its dive, disappearing into the clouds. The German pilot didn't bother to glance back, confident that the British aircraft couldn't maintain the chase. Gray's engine eventually reignited with a rough cough. His potential 5th kill had escaped, not due to the adversary's skill, but a flaw in British engineering. He landed at Biggin Hill 20 minutes later, completing the same maintenance report he had twice before. Engine cutout during negative G maneuver. Duration, 2.3 seconds. Enemy aircraft escaped. This report would join 2,300 others in an Air Ministry filing cabinet, chronicling 2,300 documented engine failures during the Battle of Britain alone. Moments when British pilots were utterly defenseless aloft. Somewhere within that trove of documents lay the explanation for why so many young men never returned home. Yet, finding the answer wasn't the challenge. The real difficulty was that no one seemed able to rectify it, save for one woman working solitarily in a Farnborough laboratory. A woman mostly unknown to the RAF. Her name was Beatrice Shilling, and she was poised to defy every Air Ministry regulation to preserve their lives. The defect was straightforward, its repercussions severe. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the core of every Spitfire and Hurricane, operated with an SU carburetor equipped with a float chamber. In normal flight, gravity reliably fed fuel into the engine. The system functioned flawlessly. However, combat flight was anything but normal. During a pilot's aggressive dive, negative G-forces abruptly thrust everything upwards, including the fuel. The fuel surged to the top of the float chamber, causing the float to drop to the bottom and the valve to open completely. This flooded the system, drowning the supercharger and causing the engine to fail. This typically lasted 1 or 2 seconds, sometimes long enough for a Messerschmitt to loop back and riddle the cockpit with cannon fire. The Germans faced no such issue. Their Daimler-Benz DB601 engine utilized direct fuel injection, eliminating the problematic float chamber and preventing flooding. A Bf 109 pilot could invert, dive vertically, and sustain negative G-forces for 10 continuous seconds without the engine faltering. Luftwaffe tacticians grasped this advantage within weeks of the initial engagements. Their strategy was elegant. When a British fighter got on your tail, dive. The Spitfire would follow, its engine would cut out, and you could either escape or turn and destroy it while it was helpless. They dubbed this the English disease and exploited it in every dogfight. Fighter Command was aware of the problem, having known since 1937. Engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment had submitted reports, recommendations, and proposed modifications, but nothing materialized. The Air Ministry had different priorities: production schedules, budget debates, and arguments over the true severity of the issue. Then came the Battle of Britain. Between July and October 1940, RAF pilots recorded engine cutouts in 43% of diving attacks, nearly half of all aggressive maneuvers resulting in engine failure. Squadron commanders estimated 80 to 100 pilot fatalities were directly attributable to the carburetor flaw. Men who had Germans in their sights, men who performed flawlessly, died because their engines betrayed them at the worst possible moment. Rolls-Royce was developing a solution, a pressure carburetor, a complete redesign of the fuel system using injection principles similar to the German engines. Its estimated completion was late 1943. The RAF could not afford to wait 3 years. They were losing pilots faster than they could train replacements. Every week, experienced personnel perished due to a float chamber designed for peacetime flying. The dossier landed on Beatrice Shilling's desk in November 1940. As the principal technical officer for carburetor research and development, she was the sole female engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. She meticulously reviewed the combat reports, examined maintenance logs, and interviewed surviving pilots who had experienced engine failures. Within a week, she fully comprehended the problem. Resolving it would take her 4 months. Testing it would jeopardize her entire career. If you wish to learn how a single woman's deceptively simple innovation salvaged the lives of countless RAF pilots, please like this video. It helps us share more forgotten wartime accounts. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Now, back to Schilling. Schilling was never meant to be an engineer. Born in 1909 in Waterlooville, a small Hampshire town, to a butcher father, society dictated that girls from her background pursue careers as secretaries, nurses, or shopkeepers. Schilling harbored alternative ambitions. At 14, using savings from odd jobs, she acquired a defunct motorcycle. Her parents believed she merely sought to ride it. She sought to comprehend it. She meticulously disassembled the engine down to its smallest components, understanding each part's function before reassembling it on her bedroom floor, leaving it in superior condition than before. At 25, she raced that motorcycle at Brooklands, achieving 106 miles per hour around the concrete banking and earning the British Motorcycle Racing Club Gold Star, one of only 3 women in history to do so. Racing imparted lessons unavailable in textbooks, how engines behaved under duress, when and why they failed, and how to anticipate a problem before instrumentation indicated it. Now, she was the RAF's carburetor specialist, and their carburetors were claiming pilots' lives. The solution materialized in January 1941. Fundamental physics. If the problem stemmed from excessive fuel supply during negative G maneuvers, then restrict the fuel flow. Not entirely, but sufficiently to prevent flooding. The engine would still receive the necessary fuel, just not enough to overwhelm it. A brass disc, centrally perforated. Install it in the fuel line ahead of the carburetor. Calibrate the hole's size to permit precisely enough fuel for maximum power, and no more. She personally machined the initial prototype, experimenting with 17 different hole diameters, and conducting simulations for 6 weeks. The optimal diameter was 0.04 inches. Bench tests yielded perfect results. Engine cutouts decreased from 2 seconds to a mere fraction of a heartbeat. Too brief to be consequential in combat. Yet, bench tests were not combat. Schilling needed to validate her invention in an authentic dogfight. The hurdle lay in authorization. Installing unauthorized modifications on RAF aircraft constituted a court-martial offense. The Air Ministry stipulated 6 months of testing, review committees, safety certifications, and paperwork. A process that would consume more time than pilots had left to live. Schilling possessed 6 brass restrictors and a critical decision to make. She could await authorization, adhering to protocol and procedure, or she could save lives immediately and confront the repercussions later. On March 17, 1941, she loaded her Norton motorcycle with tools and restrictors and rode 40 miles through the English countryside to RAF Biggin Hill. Morning patrols were being prepared. Ground crews swarmed over Spitfires and Hurricanes, conducting engine checks and loading ammunition. Schilling located the chief mechanic, Sergeant Harris, who had serviced Merlin engines since pre-war, possessing 16 years of experience and hands that instinctively understood every bolt and wire within the Merlin. She presented him with the brass disc, explicated the physics, and revealed her need to install it in an aircraft without authorization, without paperwork, and without the knowledge of anyone in command. Harris rotated the restrictor in his oil-stained fingers. Such a small thing. Such a simple thing. How do you know it works? He inquired. Bench tests. 6 weeks of them. Perfect results every time. Bench tests aren't combat. I know. That's why I'm here. Harris surveyed the Spitfires on the flight line, observing young pilots entering cockpits. Young men who entrusted their lives to their engines. I've lost 11 pilots to engine cutouts, he stated softly. 11 good men. Peterson, Williams, that Scottish lad MacLeod. Couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He looked at Schilling, then at the restrictor in his hand. If this thing works, I don't care if the king himself hasn't authorized it. He retrieved his welding kit and proceeded towards the nearest Spitfire. Flight Lieutenant Al Deere was among Fighter Command's most seasoned pilots, a New Zealander with 54 combat missions and 7 confirmed kills. He had been shot down twice, survived a mid-air collision, and walked away from a crash landing that should have been fatal. He had also reported engine failure 4 times, all during diving attacks, all within the preceding 3 months. On March 17th, his Spitfire became the first aircraft equipped with Schilling's restrictor. He remained unaware. No one informed him. If the modification failed, Schilling intended to bear the full responsibility, not a pilot who had no say in the matter. Harris welded the restrictor into the fuel line in under 2 minutes, rendering it invisible unless one knew precisely where to look. Deere entered the cockpit at 7:15 for a standard morning patrol. 2 hours over the channel, scanning for German formations. Schilling stood at the airfield's edge, her heart pounding, her hands steady. If the restrictor worked, Deere would notice no difference. If it failed, if it starved the engine, if the weld fractured, if the hole was incorrectly sized, Deere would plummet from the sky, and Schilling would forever bear the knowledge of his death. The Spitfire's Merlin engine roared to life. Deere taxied to the runway, released the brakes, accelerated, and lifted off. Schilling observed his ascent until the Spitfire became a mere speck against the overcast British sky, then settled into a tense vigil. The minutes dragged, each feeling like an eternity. She restlessly paced the perimeter of the airfield, repeatedly checking her watch, mentally calculating fuel consumption for a 2-hour patrol, perhaps 2.5 at most if Deere pushed it. Around her, ground crews went about their duties, mechanics tending to other aircraft. The war continued its relentless march, seemingly oblivious to the personal drama unfolding. For them, it was just another day. For Schilling, it was everything. She had previously tested engine modifications, published scholarly articles, and attended numerous conferences, but she had never before staked a human life on her professional convictions. Never before had she dispatched a man into conflict with a piece of equipment that existed solely on the strength of her belief in its efficacy. Belief, she knew, was not proof. And if her conviction proved unfounded, belief would not restore Deere. Harris approached her after an hour, offering a cup of tea. She accepted it, though her stomach was too knotted to drink. "He's an excellent pilot," Harris remarked. "The squadron's finest. If anyone can properly evaluate your device, it's him." Schilling nodded in silent agreement. She had selected Deere precisely for these qualities. He was experienced, audacious, the type of pilot who would plunge into a dive without hesitation. The kind of pilot who would swiftly determine whether the restrictor functioned as intended or not. 90 minutes had passed. The patrol should soon be concluding, and Deer ought to be heading back towards Biggin Hill. If all had gone as planned, if his engine hadn't failed over the channel, if he wasn't currently adrift in a life jacket, watching his Spitfire sink into the cold, gray depths, if he wasn't already deceased. 2 hours and 17 minutes later, Deer's Spitfire emerged over the airfield. Schilling, whose eyes ached from her prolonged sky-gazing, was the first to spot it. A solitary aircraft, free of smoke or visible damage. Deer executed a smooth landing, taxied to the dispersal area, shut down his engine, and emerged from the cockpit, a wide grin on his face. Pilots typically did not grin after routine patrols. They appeared weary, tense, relieved to have survived. Deer, however, looked like a man who had just unveiled a profound secret. Harris reached him first. "Any issues with the engine, sir?" Deer removed his helmet. "Problems? That was the best the Merlin has ever performed." He recounted encountering 2 BF-10-9s over the channel. They had spotted him, moved to engage, then abruptly dove when he gained an advantageous position, a standard German escape maneuver. Deer had pursued them, executing a full negative G dive, stick pushed forward, the very maneuver that should have caused his engine to cut out. Yet the Merlin never faltered, maintaining full power throughout the entire procedure. Deer had closed to within 150 yards before the German pilots realized their predicament. He inflicted damage on one of them, witnessing pieces tear from the Messerschmitt's tail. The German fighter limped towards France, leaving a trail of smoke. This was the first confirmed diving attack damage Deer had achieved since August. "I don't know what maintenance did to this aircraft," Deer stated, "but I want it done to every Spitfire in the squadron." Harris glanced at Schilling, who fixed her gaze on the ground. "I believe that can be arranged, sir," Harris replied. News of the innovation spread rapidly through Fighter Command. Within 48 hours, Biggin Hill equipped every aircraft with restrictors. Pilots reported impeccable engine performance, transforming diving attacks that previously would have led to failure into confirmed kills. Squadron commanders from Hornchurch, Kenley, Tangmere, North Weald, and Manston inundated them with calls. "What did Biggin Hill do to their engines? How can we get this?" The Air Ministry learned of it within a week. Schilling anticipated fury, court-martial threats, and the abrupt end of her career. Instead, she received a phone call. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of 11 Group, the man responsible for every fighter squadron defending London and southeast England. "Miss Schilling," he began, "I've just reviewed the combat reports from Biggin Hill. I understand you're responsible." Schilling braced herself. "Yes, sir." "How quickly can you install this device in every aircraft in Fighter Command?" Schilling blinked. "Sir, you heard me. How fast?" She performed a rapid mental calculation. 43 stations, 3,000 engines. If she trained installation teams at each base, worked around the clock, and prioritized frontline squadrons. 6 weeks, she stated. Perhaps 5 if Rolls-Royce can manufacture the restrictors swiftly enough. "You have 4, Park declared. "I'll handle the authorization. You handle the installation. Don't disappoint me." Schilling assembled a team of 3 engineers and rode her Norton motorcycle to every fighter station in southern England. Biggin Hill was merely the beginning, followed by Hornchurch, Kenley, Tangmere, North Weald, Manston, Hawkinge, Gravesend, and Cuttleston. 43 stations in 4 weeks. She meticulously planned her route like a military campaign, tackling the frontline squadrons first and expanding outwards. She personally trained ground crews, demonstrated the installation procedure, supervised the initial fittings at each base, scrutinizing every weld, measuring every hole diameter, and rejecting any restrictor that failed to meet her exacting specifications. She snatched sleep in hangars when she could. consumed sandwiches on her motorcycle when time was scarce, and endured spring rains and sporadic German bombs. Some stations welcomed her. The pilots at Hornchurch lined up to shake her hand after their first successful diving attacks utilizing the restrictor. Others were perplexed by her presence. A woman issuing directives to their mechanics. A civilian instructing RAF personnel on aircraft modifications. At one station, a wing commander refused to authorize the installation, telling her to return with proper Air Ministry paperwork. Schilling presented Air Vice Marshal Parks direct authorization. The wing commander's face paled, and the installation proceeded without further demur. At another base, a young pilot inquired why she deserved such a crucial assignment. "I'm good at it," she simply replied. He pondered this for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. By April 20th, every Spitfire and Hurricane in Fighter Command was fitted with a restrictor. 2,847 Merlin engines, 4 weeks of relentless effort. The device required an official designation. The RAE termed it the RAE restrictor. The pilots, however, called it something else. Sir Stanley Hooker, chief engineer at Rolls-Royce, coined the nickname that endured: Miss Schilling's Orifice. A coarse example of RAF humor, but Schilling found she didn't mind. If a crude joke helped pilots remember who had saved them, she would accept it. The results were immediate and undeniable. Fighter Command meticulously tracked every statistic, every engagement, every kill, every loss. In March 1941, prior to the restrictor, engine cutouts occurred in 41% of diving attacks, with a kill-to-loss ratio of 1.4 to 1. 51 British fighters were lost, while 73 German aircraft were destroyed. In April 1941, after the restrictor's implementation, engine cutouts plummeted to 0.3% of diving attacks, and the kill-to-loss ratio surged to 3.1 to 1. Only 27 British fighters were lost, while 84 German aircraft were destroyed. The transformation was swift, quantifiable, and irrefutable. Pilot confidence soared overnight. Men who had previously hesitated to commit to dives now pressed their attacks without a second thought. Flight Lieutenant Robert Stanford Tuck, one of the RAF's leading aces, described the change in a letter to his family. "It's like flying a different aircraft. Before, every dive was a gamble. Would the engine keep running, or wouldn't it? You'd hesitate for just a moment, and that moment could kill you. Now there's no hesitation. The Merlin runs perfectly. No matter what I do, I can fight the way I've always wanted to fight." Flying Officer Johnny Johnson, who would become the RAF's top-scoring ace, flew his first combat missions in April. "The older pilots warned me about engine failures," Johnson recalled years later. "They said you had to be careful in a dive. Your Merlin might quit on you. By the time I started flying combat, that problem was gone. Miss Schilling had fixed it. I never gave a second thought to diving on a German. That probably saved my life a dozen times." Squadron leader Douglas Bader, the legendary pilot who flew with 2 artificial legs, credited the restrictor with fundamentally altering his tactics. "Before Schilling, we fought defensively. We were afraid of our own engines. After Schilling, we fought the way fighter pilots are supposed to fight. Aggressively, committed, without hesitation. She gave us our confidence back." Pilot Officer Al Deere, the same man who had unknowingly tested the first restrictor, became one of its staunchest advocates. "I didn't know I was the guinea pig until weeks later," Deere wrote in his memoirs. "When Miss Schilling told me what she'd done, I wasn't angry. I was grateful. She took a risk on me so that thousands of other pilots wouldn't have to take the same risk. That takes courage." Luftwaffe intelligence detected the shift within weeks. After-action reports from April noted that British fighters were no longer disengaging from diving attacks. Their tactical advantage had vanished. By May 1941, German tactical manuals had quietly removed the section advising exploitation of British engine failures. The English disease had been cured by a woman, a simple brass washer, and the courage to defy convention. The restrictor remained in service until 1943. That year, Rolls-Royce finally delivered the pressure carburetor, the proper engineering solution, incorporating fuel injection principles without a float chamber or flooding issue. However, converting existing aircraft required 8 hours per engine. Fighter Command could not afford to ground its squadrons for such extended periods, so the restrictors remained. Many aircraft flew with Miss Schilling's Orifice until 1944. Some, even until the war's conclusion. Pilots trusted it. Ground crews were proficient in its installation. The device cost less than £1 to manufacture, a brass washer that kept pilots alive for 4 years. Schilling's contributions didn't cease with the restrictor. The Royal Aircraft Establishment presented an unending stream of problems, each threatening pilots' lives and demanding a solution. She went on to develop cold start modifications for Spitfires deployed to Russia, where Arctic temperatures in Murmansk plunged to -40 degrees Celsius, causing fuel lines to freeze solid, batteries to die within hours, and engine oil to congeal into thick sludge. British aviators faced an insurmountable issue. Their aircraft would not start. The Soviet ground crew had no prior exposure to a Merlin engine. Schilling devised a unique cold start method, utilizing preheated oil and custom fuel mixtures. She then compiled a straightforward guide for Russian mechanics to follow. Spitfires embarked on combat missions over Murmansk, enduring the harsh winter. Her research extended to high-altitude performance. Towards the war's end, Spitfires attained heights of 35,000 feet, pursuing German reconnaissance planes and high-altitude bombers. At such elevations, the air was sparse and oxygen was limited. Fuel mixtures demanded precise calibration. An overly rich mixture would flood the engine, while one too lean would cause overheating. Schilling engineered modifications for altitude compensation that boosted power output by 8% above 30,000 feet. Test pilots reported enhanced climb rates, improved maneuverability, and a greater likelihood of intercepting German aircraft that presumed their safety at high altitudes. By 1945, she had spearheaded 17 major initiatives at Farnborough, including cold weather systems, high-altitude modifications, carburetor enhancements, and supercharger efficiency improvements. Each project was a lifesaver, though none garnered the same renown as her restrictor. In 1938, she married George Naylor, a mathematician at the RAE, who later flew bombers with 625 Squadron, completing 31 missions over Germany, for which he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Bomber Command experienced the highest casualty rate of any RAF branch, with 1 in 2 airmen not surviving the war. Each time Naylor embarked on a flight, the odds suggested he might not return. Schilling comprehended these probabilities better than most. She had, after all, made calculating such odds her profession. She understood precisely how slim the margin was between life and death at 20,000 feet above Germany. Naylor defied expectations, returning home in 1944. They never discussed his wartime experiences, nor did he inquire about her work. Some matters are best left unspoken. In 1948, King George VI bestowed upon Schilling the title of Officer of the Order of the British Empire. She attended the ceremony at Buckingham Palace, received her medal, and posed for photographs with the monarch. When a reporter inquired about the key to her success, she simply replied, "Solving problems. That's all engineering is. Someone has a problem. You find a solution. You make it work." The reporter then asked if being a woman had impeded her career. Schilling shrugged, stating, "I didn't have time to think about being a woman. I was too busy being an engineer." The subsequent morning, she was back at Farnborough, tackling jet engine issues. She never ascended to director-level positions, which remained implicitly reserved for men, unacknowledged rules that everyone adhered to. She never voiced public complaints, favoring tangible engineering over administrative tasks. After the war, her work involved the Blue Streak missile program, Britain's inaugural ballistic missile. She also investigated wet runway braking, as landing accidents were causing more pilot fatalities than engine failures by the 1950s. She authored 3 technical papers detailing how water on runways affected tire friction, a pursuit of dry physics that saved wet landings. She contributed to designing a bobsled for the RAF Olympic team, an unusual undertaking for an aeronautical engineer. Yet bobsled design incorporated the same principles she had mastered: aerodynamics, weight distribution, and friction management. The team utilized her design in competition. While they didn't secure medals, they also avoided crashes, which in bobsledding constitutes success. In 1967, Dan Gurney's Eagle Mk1 Formula One car suffered an overheating issue that his engineering team could not resolve. Someone proposed contacting the seasoned engineer who had mended the Spitfires during the war. Schilling, then 58 years old, examined the cooling system for 2 hours, posed questions, took measurements, and performed calculations before pinpointing the solution. Engineers half her age, holding degrees from elite universities, had failed to remedy what she solved in a single afternoon. "It's the same as any other engine problem," she advised the team. "You understand the physics, you find the simplest solution, you make it work." She retired in 1969, spending her remaining years as she had her earlier ones, working on motorcycles, restoring classic machines, competing in vintage events, and maintaining the Norton she had owned since age 14, the motorcycle that had acquainted her with engine behavior under stress. She passed away on November 18, 1990, at 81. Her obituaries singularly highlighted the brass washer, referring to it as Miss Shilling's Orifice. All other achievements were mere footnotes. Today, a pub in Farnborough bears the name the Tilly Shilling, and the Brooklands Museum exhibits her racing trophies. Universities have buildings named in her honor, and engineering schools present the restrictor as a prime case study. A simple solution, immediate implementation, and quantifiable results. However, the true lesson transcends engineering. It is about courage. In March 1941, Beatrice Shilling faced a critical decision. She could adhere to protocol, await authorization, complete paperwork, and attend committee meetings while pilots perished. Alternatively, she could load a motorcycle with brass washers and personally resolve the issue. She chose to act, risking her career, her reputation, and potentially her freedom. She installed an unauthorized modification into a combat aircraft and sent a pilot into battle without his knowledge. Had she been mistaken, she would have faced court-martial, imprisonment, and ruin. Yet, she was not mistaken. Thousands of pilots returned home because of her actions. Thousands of families remained intact. Thousands of futures were lived rather than ending in military cemeteries. One woman, one motorcycle, one brass washer with a hole, and the courage to act when everyone else awaited permission. That is how history is changed. If this narrative resonated with you, please press the like button. Every like signals YouTube to extend this story's reach. Subscribe and enable notifications. We celebrate forgotten heroes from history weekly. Real individuals, real bravery. Share your location in the comments. Our community spans the globe. Thank you for watching and for remembering Beatrice Shilling. Her efforts preserved countless lives, yet her name remained largely unrecognized until now.